The phone rang at 12:47 in the morning, and the first sound out of it was Dalton Chadwick's voice cracking down the middle like ice under too much weight. The account ledgers are entirely wiped. Every quarter. Gone. Do you understand me? Gone. His breathing came ragged. The particular panic of a man realizing the floor he'd built his whole life on had just vanished beneath him. I sat up against my headboard, perfectly calm, and let the silence stretch until he filled it with my name like a prayer. Then I said the quietest, truest thing I have ever said to anyone. Who do you think set up the forensic audit watch, Dalton? The line went so silent I could hear his refrigerator humming 40 miles away. He didn't know it yet, but the wire transfers he'd been hiding for 3 years had already finished uploading themselves, time-stamped, notarized, and sent straight to the SEC. Welcome to the payback office. If stories about quiet professionals who refuse to break are worth your evening, this channel is closing in on 7,000 subscribers. One tap on that subscribe button helps these stories find the next person who needs one. My name is Cleo Ramsey. For 4 years I was lead back-end engineer at Horizon Financial Group. I built and maintained the systems that moved money from where it sat to where it needed to go. I wrote the transaction pipelines. I designed the reconciliation logic. If a single cent ever landed in the wrong column at 2 in the afternoon, I was the one who caught it. My father spent his career fixing industrial HVAC units in Ohio and came home every night smelling like copper and sweat. My mother kept the books for 3 small restaurants because the owners trusted her with the truth of their numbers. We had enough. What we didn't have was the luxury of looking past people. In my house, you learned early that the man emptying the trash had a name and a story, and you asked about both. Humility wasn't a lesson. It was just the water we swam in. That upbringing turned out to be the most useful thing I ever brought to Horizon. When you're raised to actually see people, you notice the things they assume you're too small to catch. You notice when a man stops meeting your eyes. You notice when numbers stop breathing the way numbers are supposed to. Horizon was a mid-sized financial services firm in Charlotte. Glass lobby, a wall of awards, and a CEO who liked to be photographed in front of both. Dalton Chadwick had founded the firm 19 years earlier. He was tall enough to fill a doorway, silver at the temples in a way that looked almost designed, and he had a gift for making whoever stood in front of him feel like the only competent person in the building, right up until the moment he no longer needed them. I watched him do it to vendors, to junior analysts, once to a board member. The warmth was genuine while it lasted, and it evaporated the second it stopped being useful. I clocked that about him in my first year and filed it away. For a long time none of it touched me. I was useful, and Dalton kept useful things close. He called me the backbone of the operation, which I understood to be exactly the kind of compliment men like him hand out, because a backbone is something you stand on, not something you look at. Then, about 8 months before that midnight call, the numbers stopped breathing right. A reconciliation job I'd written to run at 3 a.m. started coming back clean every single night. Too clean, the way a room looks too clean when someone's wiped it down on purpose. There was a category of internal transfer and vendor settlements my system was built to flag whenever the amount crossed a certain threshold. For months, not a single one crossed it. In a firm our size, moving the money we moved, that was the equivalent of it not raining once all year. I said nothing to anyone. The fastest way to get walked out of a building is to bring a senior executive a theory with no proof. My mother taught me that you don't accuse, you reconcile. You let the numbers speak in their own flat, unarguable voice. So I watched quietly the way I do most things. I went back into reconciliation logic I'd written 2 years before, and what I found made the back of my neck go cold. Someone had altered the threshold parameters on the vendor settlement flags, raised the ceiling so high that no realistic transfer would ever trip it. A $40,000 settlement used to get reviewed. Now the line sat at $4 million. Anything under it sailed through unseen, unquestioned. The change had come through an administrative account, and that account belonged to the CEO's office. I sat at my desk on a half-empty floor at 7 that evening, the cleaning crew working down the hall, and felt my stomach drop, because some discoveries can't be undiscovered. The instant I knew, I stopped being a woman who could pretend not to. I thought of my father then. A winter when I was 12, a building manager had asked him to certify a heating system as up to code, so he could rent the units out. It wasn't up to code. My father refused and lost the contract over it. We ate cheaper that month and he never once complained. When I asked him why, he told me, "Cleo, your name is the only thing in this world nobody can take from you unless you hand it over. So don't hand it over." I wasn't going to hand mine to Dalton Chadwick. But I wasn't going to be reckless either. The threshold change told me a door had been left unlocked. It didn't tell me what was walking through it. So I built something. Over the following weeks, working early mornings and late nights, I wrote a quiet little watcher, a forensic logging routine sitting underneath the main system like a second floor beneath the first. It didn't interfere with anything. It simply observed every vendor settlement, every wire instruction, every ledger modification, the amount, the timestamp, the originating account, the destination. And it wrote all of it somewhere outside Horizon's own infrastructure, into an encrypted store answering only to a key I carried on a drive that never left me. Within 9 days, comfort was no longer possible. The vendor settlements were flowing to a cluster of LLCs with names built to mean nothing: Pinnacle Strategic Holdings, Cardinal Vantage Partners, Greywater Consulting, Clean Corporate, forgettable names designed to slide past a tired eye scanning a spreadsheet. I pulled public records from my own apartment on my own machine, keeping Horizon's network entirely out of it. Most of the entities had been formed within the past 3 years. None had a real website. 2 shared a registered agent at the same Delaware address. And every single one traced back, through a thin membrane of holding companies, to the same beneficial owner. It was him. Of course it was him. Dalton had built a circulatory system pulling money out of client settlements in pieces small enough to vanish and large enough to matter, routing it through shell companies he controlled, and washing it clean, all by reaching into the very system I'd built and quietly switching off the alarm. He'd used my own work to blind the company to his theft. He didn't know me at all. He knew the version of me who nodded in meetings and fixed problems before they ever reached him. It had never once occurred to him that the person who could build the watchtower could also decide where to aim it. I kept the watcher running. I told no one. I waited. The reason to move arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in good news. Dalton called me into his office at the end of the day. "Cleo," he said, warm as a fireplace, "I've been thinking about the gala." The gala was Horizon's annual event, black tie downtown, the firm parading its best numbers and handing out internal awards. Theater, and Dalton loved it the way some men love a stage. "I want you up front this year," he said. "We're recognizing the technology team's work on the reconciliation platform. You built the backbone of that. I want the room to see the face behind it." Then he smiled, all teeth and sincerity. "It's time people knew who Cleo Ramsey is." The smile didn't reach the muscles around his eyes. It was a smile he'd decided on, not one that had happened to him. I thanked him. I told him I was honored. I said all the right things because the safest place to stand near Dalton Chadwick was directly inside his blind spot, nodding. Something was wrong though, and I couldn't shake it once I got home. So I went back to the data, not the financial ledgers this time. I went into the document systems, the access logs, the quiet administrative trails most executives forget even exist. I wasn't looking for money anymore. I was looking for myself. What I found was a folder created 11 days earlier in a shared HR directory. It should have been invisible to someone at my level, except that 2 years before, I'd been the one who built the permissions architecture, and I'd left myself a maintenance pathway I'd never used. I used it that night. The folder was labeled with my employee ID. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a draft termination letter. My name, my title, and effective date set for the Monday after the gala. Stated reason: gross negligence and unauthorized modification of financial systems, resulting in material data integrity failures. He was going to fire me for the very thing he had done. He was going to stand me up in front of the entire firm and its biggest clients, smile that engineered smile, and then for days later walk me out with my name stapled to his crime. When auditors eventually came looking, there'd be a tidy paper trail showing the lead engineer had tampered with the reconciliation system, been caught, and been removed. The threshold changes made through his administrative account would become mine in his version of events. The shell company transfers, the losses, all of it would land on the woman who'd had the misfortune of understanding the system better than anyone else. I wasn't a person to him. I was a fire exit, a way out of a building he'd set alight himself. The second document was a memo to outside counsel laying out the case against me in clinical language. A rogue engineer operating without oversight. The third was a list titled Transition Items, things to handle once I was gone. Reassign system credentials. Revoke repository access. Audit her commits. And the last line. Confirm she had no external copies. He was worried about external copies. I sat in the blue light of my own kitchen at 1 a.m. and felt the fear drain out of me, replaced by something steadier, because he was right to worry. There were external copies. Months of them, sitting in an encrypted store, including every single change ever made through his administrative account. He thought he was setting a trap. He had no idea he was walking into one I'd built beneath his feet 2 seasons before he ever thought to dig my grave. I closed the folder, left no trace I'd been inside it, and then did the hardest thing of all, nothing. I went to work the next morning, smiled at Dalton in the hallway, told him I was excited for the gala. I had a little under 2 weeks and I was going to need every hour of it. There's a particular calm that settles over you once you stop hoping a situation will resolve itself and accept that you're the one who has to resolve it. I sat at my own kitchen table, never at the office, never on Horizon's network, and made a list of what would need to be true for the truth to survive contact with a man like Dalton Chadwick. First, the evidence couldn't depend on me. Dalton's whole strategy rested on the assumption that he controlled the story because he controlled the systems. Anything I personally handed to anyone, he could reframe as the desperate fabrication of a disgruntled engineer he was already firing for tampering. My word against his was a fight I'd lose. The evidence had to come from somewhere he didn't control, from a source he couldn't discredit. Second, the timing couldn't be mine to fumble. Move too early, I'd tip him off. Move too late, I'd already be terminated and branded, and anything that surfaced would look like sour grapes. I sat with that for 3 days and then I understood what I'd actually been building all along. The Watcher was passive. It sat in the dark, recorded everything it saw, and waited for someone to come ask what it knew. The problem was that the only someone who knew it existed was me. If I was the one to produce its testimony, Dalton would say I'd written every line of it myself the night before. What I needed was for the witness to speak on its own, without me in the room. I needed it to reach the one audience Dalton Chadwick couldn't charm, buy or fire, the regulators. Horizon lived under the watch of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Dalton had spent years making sure nothing irregular ever reached those channels, because he controlled the system that decided what counted as irregular. So I was going to give it new eyes. Over the following days I rebuilt the Watcher. It would no longer just observe and store, it would evaluate. I wrote a forensic audit routine that compared every vendor settlement against the historical pattern of legitimate settlements, the ones from before the threshold had been quietly raised. It learned what honest money looked like, then watched for money that didn't. And when the routine confirmed a pattern crossing the legal threshold for a reportable irregularity, not my opinion, the actual regulatory definition, it would file automatically. It would package the whole forensic record and transmit it directly to the SEC, with cryptographic timestamps proving exactly when each piece of evidence had been recorded. Not the night before. Not by a cornered woman. Months earlier, in real time as the crimes were actually happening. I set it to arm itself on a trigger. The routine would stay dormant until someone reached in to destroy the historical ledgers themselves, the originals, the records proving what the numbers used to look like before he started bleeding them. Because I knew Dalton. The night he believed he'd finally cornered me, he'd do the one thing a guilty man can never resist: reach for the cleanup. He'd try to wipe the ledgers to make sure nothing was left to contradict his version of events once I was gone. He'd pull the trigger himself, with no idea that pulling it would be the last free thing he'd ever do. I finished the routine the Thursday before the gala. I tested it in isolation until I was certain, then let it go quiet, sitting beneath everything, patient as a held breath. Then I went to get my dress for Saturday night. The ballroom on Saturday looked exactly the way Dalton wanted everything in his life to look. Expensive, polished, arranged so the light fell on him. Ice sculptures. A string quartet. I arrived in a dark green dress my mother would have approved of, and a calm that surprised even me. I knew what sat in the folder with my employee ID on it. I knew the man crossing the room to greet me was planning to put my name on his crime and walk me out inside 48 hours. And still I felt no urge to flinch. I felt the way you feel once you've checked the math 3 times and know the answer is right. There's a peace in that. "There she is," Dalton said, taking my hand in both of his. The woman of the hour. He leaned in close. I mean it, Cleo. None of this works without you. I thanked him. I let him steer me toward the front of the room. The recognition came midway through the evening. Dalton took the small stage, microphone in hand, and did the thing he was genuinely gifted at, telling a story that made everyone in the room feel part of something larger. He talked about vision, about trust, about the responsibility of safeguarding other people's money, about how the firm's reputation rested on the integrity of its systems. I stood at the side of the stage and listened to a man describe the very thing he was stealing as the thing he held most sacred. Then he called my name. Our reconciliation platform is the backbone of everything we do here, he said. And the architect of that backbone is a woman whose work most of you have never seen, because the best engineering is invisible. You only notice it when it fails. Well, it has never failed. Cleo Ramsey, come up here. I walked into the light and the room applauded. Dalton put his hand on my shoulder for the photograph. Cameras flashed. I smiled the real smile that time. Not because of anything he'd said, but because of what sat silent and patient beneath all of it, waiting. He handed me a small glass award, my name etched into it, in recognition of engineering excellence. I still have it. I keep it where I can see it, because there's a particular justice in a guilty man having his crime memorialized in his own handwriting. Etched in glass, dated the night before everything came apart. I said a few words. I thanked the team. I thanked my parents. I stepped down and the evening rolled on, and the warmth never once left Dalton's face, because in his mind the hard part was already behind him. I went home a little after 11. I took off the green dress and hung it carefully. I set the glass award on the kitchen counter where the streetlight caught it. I made myself a cup of tea, the way my mother always did when something important was happening. Then I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Dalton was not a patient man. The kind of man who, the instant he believes he's won, can't resist tidying the board. All night, some thought had been itching at the back of his mind. The historical ledgers, the originals, the records still holding the shape of honest money. As long as those existed, there was a version of events that didn't end the way he needed it to. He couldn't walk me out on Monday and leave them sitting there. At 12:41 a.m. on the drive in my pocket, the watcher woke up. I'd built it to run independent of me on purpose, but I'd left myself one small thread. A single silent notification. My phone lit up once on the dark kitchen table, one soft pulse of light. I didn't even reach for it right away. I just looked at it and felt the whole long 8 months settle into place like a key finally turning. He'd reached for the ledgers. And the moment he did, the forensic record had already begun transmitting itself to the SSE. Not from me, from the system, from a witness that had been writing everything down long before either of us ever stood in that ballroom. 6 minutes later my phone rang. The screen said Dalton Chadwick. I let it ring twice, then answered. The account ledgers are entirely wiped. His voice came through stripped of everything I'd heard in the ballroom 4 hours earlier. No warmth, no performance, just a man alone in his kitchen watching the floor drop out from under 19 years of carefully arranged lies. Every quarter gone. Do you understand me, Cleo? Gone. I held the phone to my ear, looked at the glass award catching the streetlight on my counter, and let him keep going. I need you to come in, he said. Tonight, right now. The whole ledger system, the historical records, something's corrupted it, it's all blank, and you're the only one who knows that architecture well enough to, he caught himself. You built it. You can fix it. Whatever it costs, whatever you need, just get it back. And there it was. The man with a termination letter waiting for me was calling me at 1 in the morning to beg me to undo the very destruction he'd just caused. I could have let him keep talking, but I found I didn't want to. What I wanted was for him to understand, just once, that the person he'd decided was too small to see had been holding the whole thing in her hands the entire time. So I asked him quietly, almost gently, "Who do you think set up the forensic audit watch, Dalton?" The silence that came back wasn't the silence of a bad connection. It was the silence of a man's entire understanding of his situation rearranging itself in real time. I could hear him replaying the evening, the ballroom, the award, the hand on my shoulder, and reassembling it all into a shape he hadn't seen until that exact second. "What did you do?" he said finally, his voice gone flat and small. "I didn't do anything," I told him. "I wrote something that watches months ago. It watches the ledgers, and it watches every change anyone makes through the administrative accounts. It doesn't have opinions, Dalton. Just keeps records. Honest ones. The kind that show what the money looked like before someone raised the thresholds, and what it looked like after, and exactly which account made the change and when. I let that sit a moment. It's very patient. It's been waiting for someone to delete the originals. That was always going to be the moment it mattered most. So I told it that when that happened, it should make sure the right people had a copy. What right people? Barely a whisper now. The ones whose job it is to look at firms like ours, I said. It finished transmitting a little while ago. Around the time you were dialing my number, I'd guess. A long pause, and then the old instinct roared back. The dealmaker, the charmer. You don't understand, Dalton said. Cleo, listen to me. Whatever you think you saw, there's context. These are complicated transactions, and a system, an automated system, it doesn't understand context. We can fix this. Tonight. I'll make it worth your while. Name it, a title, a number. Whatever you've been wanting, it's yours. That was the moment I understood he was never going to be sorry. Not really. He was offering me right then the exact thing he'd planned to take from me on Monday, as though it had ever been his to give. Dalton, I said, I don't want a title. Then what? He said. What do you want? I thought about it and gave him the most honest answer I had. I want the records to be true. That's all. That was always all. The records are true now. I don't need anything else from you. And I hung up. I sat in the dark a while after that. My phone buzzed twice more, him calling back. And I turned it face down and let it. There was nothing left to say that the system hadn't already said, in the only language that couldn't be charmed, reframed, or fired. The Monday that was supposed to be my last day at Horizon arrived, and I went to work. I wasn't going to hide. I'd done nothing wrong. The termination never came. By Monday morning, Dalton Chadwick had far larger problems than a draft letter sitting in a folder. He wasn't in the office. The official word was that the CEO was attending to an urgent personal matter. The unofficial word was that something had gone very wrong at the top of the company. I knew what. I said nothing. I did my job. I waited. It took 11 days for the first regulators to walk through the glass lobby Dalton loved so much. They didn't announce themselves to the floor, but you can't bring that many serious people in dark suits into a building without the building noticing. The forensic record had done exactly what I'd built it to do. Handed them a complete, time-stamped, cryptographically verified map of 3 years of wire fraud. Every transfer. Every dollar pulled from client settlements and washed through shell companies tracing back to a single beneficial owner. They didn't have to take anyone's word for it. The records were evidence, dated to the moment each crime occurred, recorded in real time by a system with no stake in the outcome and no reason to lie. There was nothing left for Dalton to charm. That was the part that broke him. His entire life had been a series of rooms he talked his way out of, but you can't talk your way out of a timestamp. You can't flatter a cryptographic hash. The numbers didn't care how warm he was. They simply said what happened when and through whose account. I was interviewed. I told them the truth, all of it, plainly and completely. I walked them through the threshold modifications. I explained the watcher what it observed, how it recorded, why I'd built it, and what it had been waiting for. I didn't editorialize. I'd learned long ago that truth is most powerful when you let it stand on its own. One investigator, near the end of a long afternoon, set down her pen and looked at me. She asked why I'd built the watcher in the first place back at the start before I had any proof. I thought about my father and the heating system he'd refused to certify, and what he'd said about my name being the only thing nobody can take unless I hand it over. Because the numbers stopped breathing right, I told her. And I was raised to notice when something stops breathing right, and not look away just because looking is inconvenient. She nodded slowly, picked her pen back up and wrote that down. The fallout unfolded the way these things do, slowly, then all at once. Dalton was placed on leave, then removed, then charged. The board brought in outside leadership and an army of auditors. There were hard weeks. Clients pulled accounts. The wall of awards came down quietly one afternoon. The glass lobby stayed, but it stopped feeling like a stage. Through all of it, I kept doing my job because the system still needed to run. That was still my work, and the work was still good, and the work was still mine. Once the dust began to settle, the new leadership asked to meet with me. The woman brought in to lead Horizon through the wreckage was named Adeora Whitfield, and she was nothing like Dalton Chadwick. She didn't stand at the glass with her back half-turned. She sat across a plane table and looked at me directly when she spoke. "I've read the forensic record," she said. "All of it. I've also read a draft termination letter that was sitting in a folder with your name on it, dated the Monday after the gala." She let that sit a moment. "He was going to put his crime on you and walk you out in front of every client we have. And instead of running or leaking, or doing any of the dozen things a person in your position would have been entitled to do, you built something that told the truth on its own, and you kept coming to work." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the true thing. "I just wanted the records to be accurate." "I know," she said. "That's exactly why I want you to run them." She offered me the role of Chief Technology Officer, not as a reward, she was careful to say, but because the firm was about to spend years rebuilding trust, and the only way to do that was to put people who valued the truth in the rooms where decisions got made. I asked for a day to think it over, not because I was unsure, but because my mother taught me you never accept anything important in the same breath it's offered. I took the job. That was some time ago now. The firm is smaller than it was under Dalton and quieter, and I think it's better for both. We move other people's money from where it is to where it needs to go, accurately. The first thing I built was the kind of system Horizon should always have had, one where no single person, not even me, can quietly switch off the alarm. The point was never to catch one guilty man. The point was to build something honest enough that the next guilty man never gets the chance. Dalton's case worked its way through the system. The wire fraud the Watcher recorded wasn't the kind of thing a charming man talks his way out of. He answered for what he did. I didn't attend. I had no need to watch it. People sometimes ask if I felt triumphant, whether there was a moment of victory. I tell them the truth, no. There was never triumph. There was only the quiet, settling weight of a true thing landing where it belonged. I didn't beat Dalton Chadwick. I simply refused to let his version of events be the one that survived, and I built something patient enough to outlast his charm. That isn't revenge. It was quieter than that and cleaner, and it left no mark on me at all. It just left the records true. The Glass Award still sits on my shelf, etched with his handwriting, dated the night before everything came apart. I keep it there on purpose, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the people written off as harmless are very often the ones holding the whole thing in their hands, and that competence paired with a clear conscience will outlast a power play every time, if you're only patient enough to let it. My name is Cleo Ramsey. I am the CTO of Horizon Financial Group. I came from a house where an honest woman kept honest books, and I've spent my life making sure the records are true. That's the whole story. If this one landed the way it was meant to, the Payback Office has more where that came from. The subscribe button is right there. And these stories don't reach the people who need them without your help. Thanks for listening.